For the first time, the Ribeiro family from the small town of Alegrete was venturing beyond the borders of their home state, Rio Grande do Sul, to discover the natural beauty of the Serra da Canastra. The last known image of them is an amateur photograph, a father, a mother, and their two children, smiling on a red dirt trail with the overcast sky of the savanna stretching out behind them. 4 years later, cavers exploring a remote grotto would make a discovery that would bring the entire nation to a standstill, glued to their news screens. What lay hidden in that cave would forever be seared into the memory of everyone who followed the case. João Ribeiro woke up at 5 a.m. every day, a habit he kept even after an early retirement forced by a back injury. At 43, the former truck driver had traded the country's highways for the quiet routine of Alegrete. His simple three-bedroom house with its large yard and a bergamot tree that bore sweet fruit in the winter was the perfect sanctuary for a man who had spent decades sleeping in the cab of a truck. His wife, Maria das Dores, divided her time between teaching at the local school and caring for their children. A primary school teacher for 15 years, she knew every child in the neighborhood by name and family history. Her love for nature was a gift from her childhood in the countryside, where she learned to recognize bird songs and the signs that foretold a summer storm. On weekends, she would take her children, Carlos and Ana Paula, for walks along the river, teaching them the names of native plants and telling stories of the old cattle drovers who once passed through the region. Carlos, at 16, was torn between his high school studies and his dream of becoming a professional soccer player. A skilled midfielder for the local youth team, he proudly wore the tricolor Gremio jersey his father had given him for his last birthday. His afternoons were filled with practice on the neighborhood sand court, where local boys gathered for pickup games that lasted until the sun vanished behind the eucalyptus trees in the central square. Ana Paula, the youngest at 12, carried a cloth doll made by her grandmother everywhere she went. A bright and curious child, she had a habit of asking questions that left adults speechless. She loved collecting colorful stones she found on family outings and dreamed of seeing the ocean, a fantasy that seemed impossibly distant from the Ribeiro family's financial reality. Her Saturday mornings were spent helping her mother in their backyard garden, where they grew lettuce, tomatoes, and herbs that supplemented the family income. The family's life followed the unhurried rhythm typical of the gaucho interior. João spent his mornings fixing broken things around the house or helping neighbors with small repairs, tasks that didn't strain his injured spine. Maria graded notebooks at the kitchen table, always with a cup of chimarrão being passed from hand to hand. Dinner conversations revolved around school events, Carlos's soccer games, and Ana Paula's daily discoveries. The Ribeiros were known in their neighborhood as a hardworking, united family. João had earned the respect of his neighbors during his years on the road, always returning with small gifts and stories from the cities he visited. Maria was beloved by her students' parents who trusted her patience and dedication. Their home was a frequent gathering spot, especially for Sunday barbecues where João showed off his skills at the grill and Maria prepared salads that were a hit with everyone. Then the winter of 1995 brought an idea that would change their story forever. In a school magazine, Maria had read about the natural wonders of the Serra da Canastra in Minas Gerais, specifically the source of the São Francisco River and the crystal-clear waterfalls that cut through the landscape. The idea of visiting a place so different from their own ignited an enthusiasm that quickly spread through the house. João, initially hesitant due to the cost, was eventually won over by the excitement of his wife and children. For months, the family saved every cent. Maria took on private tutoring on Saturday afternoons. João accepted small carpentry jobs, and even Carlos chipped in, washing cars at a local workshop on weekends. Ana Paula gave up the sweets she usually bought after school, depositing the coins into a porcelain piggy bank. Dinner conversations now centered on trip preparations. Maria studied maps borrowed from the public library, plotting the most economical route to São Roque de Minas, the town that would be their base. João calculated the costs of fuel, lodging, and food, adjusting the family budget to make the dream a reality. Carlos researched the region's history, learning about the pioneers who had explored the lands in search of gold. They strategically chose to travel in March, as the summer heat gave way to the milder autumn weather. Maria secured a week off from school, which coincided with the children's vacation. João rented a white Fiat Uno from a neighboring town, deeming it reliable enough for the dirt roads of the mountains. Ana Paula insisted on bringing her cloth doll, while Carlos refused to leave without his soccer ball, dreaming of pickup games he might find along the way. The final preparations were intense. Maria bought a disposable camera to capture the special moments. The neighborhood watched with a mix of curiosity and admiration. Few of them had ever traveled so far from home. On the eve of their departure, the family gathered in the kitchen for a final check. Maria had made sandwiches for the road and packed a small first aid kit. João double-checked their documents and the cash he had stashed in different parts of their luggage. The excitement was palpable. It would be their first time traveling together beyond the borders of Rio Grande do Sul. An adventure that was more than just a vacation. It was the realization of a collective dream built on savings, planning, and immense anticipation. If you're captivated by this true story that shocked a nation, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next episodes. Now, let's continue. The dawn of March 15, 1995 broke clear over Alegrete. João was awake before his alarm, eager to begin the journey. The smell of fresh coffee already filled the kitchen. Carlos and Ana Paula had slept fitfully, too excited for a peaceful rest. After a quick but warm breakfast, Carlos helped his father load the luggage into the white Uno parked out front. The farewells were emotional. Their grandparents hugged them tightly, asking for beautiful photographs and reminding João to drive carefully on the unfamiliar roads. At 7 in the morning, under a shy sun, the Uno headed north, carrying the hopes of 4 people on the verge of a unique adventure. The first hours on the road were festive. Carlos controlled the radio and Ana Paula played with her doll, inventing stories about the adventures that awaited them. They arrived in São Roque de Minas late the next afternoon. The guest house they chose was simple but welcoming, run by a local couple who knew the region well. Over dinner, the owner gave them valuable tips on the best trails and times to visit the waterfalls, always stressing the importance of respecting nature and staying on marked paths. Their first day in the mountains was spent at the most popular tourist spots. Maria used up several shots on her disposable camera, capturing the family in front of park signs and crystal-clear waterfalls. Carlos was awestruck by the vastness of the Cerrado, so different from the fields of home. Ana Paula collected colorful stones and dried leaves, creating a small treasure trove of memories. João quickly adapted to the slower pace of vacation, his back pain seemingly vanishing in the pure mountain air. Maria felt a deep sense of fulfillment watching the joy on her children's faces. On the third day, their plans took an unexpected turn. At breakfast, a local man named Sebastian approached their table. He was a middle-aged man with skin weathered by the sun, and he possessed a deep knowledge of the area. Noticing the family's genuine interest in nature, he wanted to share a special secret. He told them of a little-known trail that led to a hidden waterfall of incomparable beauty. The path, he explained, wasn't on any official maps, but had been used for generations by locals seeking a private refuge. It began on a dirt road about 15 kilometers from the guest house. Maria was immediately intrigued. João, ever cautious, asked about the trail's safety and difficulty. Sebastião reassured them, explaining it was a moderate hike suitable for all ages. Carlos and Ana Paula were thrilled by the prospect of a real adventure. The decision was made. The next day, they would explore this hidden treasure. Sebastião drew a crude map on a napkin pointing out key landmarks. He told them to park in a specific clearing where a tree with an old gash in its bark marked the trailhead. The night before, the expedition was filled with animated conversation. Maria packed a backpack with water, snacks, and the camera. João checked the rental car one last time. On the morning of March 17th, the sky was partly cloudy, perfect conditions for a long walk. After a hearty breakfast, the family left the guest house, promising to return by late afternoon with incredible stories to tell. The white Uno departed from São Roque de Minas at 8 a.m., following the locals' precise directions. The paved road soon gave way to a well-maintained dirt track that snaked through hills covered in the region's distinctive vegetation. Maria carefully traced their route on the makeshift map, checking every landmark Sebastião had mentioned to ensure they wouldn't lose their way to the trailhead. Just as he'd said, the clearing was easy to spot, marked by a single distinctive tree exactly as depicted on the handmade chart. João parked the white Uno in a strategic position, leaving the car clearly visible to make their return later that afternoon easier. The air was still, the silence broken only by the songs of birds native to the Cerrado and the whisper of wind through the dry leaves carpeting the forest floor. The family did a final check of the essentials in the backpack Maria had prepared: water, cookies, fruit, a disposable camera, and a small first aid kit. The trail began discreetly, almost swallowed by the dense, unassuming vegetation. Carlos took the lead, his eyes scanning for the natural markers Sebastião had described. Piles of stacked stones, branches broken in a specific way, and small clearings that served as waypoints along the route. Ana Paula walked beside her mother, her gaze filled with curiosity as she took in the flora and fauna, so different from what she knew back home in Rio Grande do Sul. The first few kilometers passed in a relaxed, cheerful mood. Maria seized the opportunity to teach her children about the Cerrado biome, pointing out medicinal plants that local people had used for generations. João maintained a slow but steady pace, careful that his chronic back pain didn't spoil the family outing. The landscape around them gradually shifted, revealing ever more impressive rock formations and vegetation that grew lusher with every step. Around 10 in the morning, the family arrived at a fork in the path, one that Sebastião hadn't mentioned. Two distinct trails opened before them. One veered left, appearing wider and more trodden. The other to the right was narrower and overgrown with low brush. Carlos studied the ground, searching for footprints or any sign of recent passage. Maria consulted the notes she'd scribbled during their conversation with the old local, hoping for a clue that might guide their choice. The decision was made by a process of elimination. The left-hand path bore the marks of animal tracks, while the trail to the right felt wilder, more in keeping with the description of a secret path. Trusting the instinct he'd honed over years of navigating unknown roads across Brazil, João chose the narrower route. Ana Paula mentally marked the location of the fork, creating a reference point for the journey back. The chosen path proved more challenging than they had anticipated. The dense vegetation forced them to push branches aside to pass, and the uneven terrain demanded constant attention to avoid a fall. Carlos adapted quickly to the difficulties, using the balance he'd developed in soccer practice to navigate the rugged ground. Maria began to feel the first hints of fatigue, but her enthusiasm was fueled by the promise of the hidden waterfall. Around noon, they emerged into another clearing, larger than the first and encircled by imposing rock walls. The place was stunningly beautiful, but it didn't match Sebastião's description. There was no sign of the promised waterfall, only a wild, preserved landscape that invited rest and contemplation. João suggested they stop for lunch, taking advantage of the natural shade offered by the rock formations. During their improvised meal, the family assessed the situation. Maria used a few clicks of the disposable camera to capture the unique scenery, while Carlos explored the perimeter, searching for any sign that the trail continued. Ana Paula played with her doll in the soft grass, creating stories of explorers in unknown lands. João leaned his back against a smooth stone, watching the clouds that had begun to gather on the horizon. After a half-hour rest, they decided to press on. João checked his watch and calculated they still had enough time to explore a little further before needing to head back to the inn. As Maria packed the leftover snacks into the backpack, Carlos spotted a narrow passage between the rocks that looked like it could be a continuation of the path. Ana Paula carefully tucked a few colorful stones she'd found into her pocket, adding them to her growing collection of treasures from the mountains. The next stage of the journey was steeper and rockier. The group had to use their hands in some sections, bracing themselves on the natural formations to overcome the more challenging obstacles. João felt a few sharp twinges in his lower back, but with the help of his children, he managed to push forward. Carlos displayed an impressive agility, often acting as a guide for his parents on the more technical sections. Maria documented it all with the disposable camera, capturing the family's teamwork in the face of the trail's challenges. Around 2 in the afternoon, they finally spotted a formation that could be the waterfall Sebastião had described. A narrow fissure between high rock walls let out the distant sound of running water, creating a mysterious and inviting atmosphere. Access, however, required descending a steep, rocky passage, a miniature climb that would demand extra care from the entire family. Carlos was the first to scout the descent, testing the safety of each foothold before signaling for his parents to follow. Maria went next, with João offering support from above to ensure his wife's movements were steady. Ana Paula, despite her young age, showed admirable courage, climbing down with constant guidance from her older brother. Her cloth doll remained safely tucked away in the backpack during the riskiest part of the maneuver. Their effort was rewarded with a spectacular sight. At the bottom of the rock fissure, a small but crystal-clear waterfall poured its icy water into a natural pool surrounded by lush vegetation. The place was even more beautiful than Sebastião had described, a true natural sanctuary preserved from time and human presence. Maria immediately grabbed the camera to record the unique moment, while Carlos tested the temperature of the water with his feet. The family spent nearly an hour exploring the secret waterfall. Ana Paula found quartz crystals on the edge of the natural pool, treasures she deemed the most precious in her entire collection. For the first time in years, João relaxed completely, letting the cold water soothe the accumulated tension in his spine. Maria collected a few unusual leaves to dry and keep as a souvenir, while Carlos imagined how cool it would be to bring his friends from Alegrete to see this magical place. But the afternoon was advancing quickly, and João began to worry about the time. The climb back up would be slower than the descent, especially considering his physical limitations and the natural fatigue after hours of hiking. Maria organized their belongings, making sure the disposable camera was well protected in the backpack. Carlos helped Ana Paula choose only the most beautiful stones, as the extra weight could make the steep return journey more difficult. The climb back proved to be even harder than they had anticipated. João had to take several breaks to rest, while Maria showed signs of fatigue she hadn't displayed on the way down. Carlos naturally fell into the role of leader, organizing the sequence of movements and offering physical support to his parents when needed. Ana Paula surprised everyone with her resilience, keeping her spirits up even during the most challenging parts of the ascent. When they finally reached the clearing with the rock walls again, the sky had taken on a grayish tone, signaling a change in the weather. João watched the heavy clouds gathering on the horizon and suggested they pick up the pace. A strong rain could make the trail slippery and dangerous. Maria checked the contents of the backpack one last time, ensuring everything important was secured against a possible storm. The journey back began under a light drizzle, which soon turned into a steady rain. Carlos stayed at the front of the group, recognizing the landmarks they had noted on the way in. Ana Paula protected her cloth doll inside her jacket, holding her mother's hand tightly so as not to slip on the wet stones. João controlled every step, avoiding any sudden movements that could aggravate the pain in his back, which was already intensifying from the day's exertion. The rain grew heavier as they reached the fork where they had chosen the path to the right that morning. The ground, once merely damp, had transformed into a muddy, treacherous surface. Carlos studied both options again, but the water streaming down the trails had erased the tracks that had guided them earlier. Maria tried to recall specific details from their morning walk, while João mentally calculated the time spent on each section to estimate which was the correct way. A decision had to be made quickly. The typical tropical downpour threatened to become a full-blown storm, and being exposed in the forest would be dangerous. João opted for the path that seemed more familiar, relying on the experience gained over years of navigating unknown roads. The family followed in single file, with Carlos in front, Ana Paula and Maria in the middle, and João bringing up the rear to ensure no one was lost in the dense vegetation. For nearly an hour they walked under the intense rain, crossing sections that seemed less and less familiar. The trail became less defined, forcing them to push their way through dense shrubs and over slippery rocks. Maria began to show signs of worry, questioning if they had gotten lost back at the confusing fork. Carlos maintained a forced optimism, but internally he too was beginning to doubt they were heading in the right direction. The situation became critical when they reached a completely unknown area dominated by rock formations they didn't remember seeing that morning. João finally admitted that they might be lost and suggested they find shelter until the rain subsided, allowing for better visibility to reorient themselves. They found a rocky overhang that offered partial protection from the downpour, where they huddled together to weigh their options. Ana Paula was starting to shiver with cold and fatigue, despite her mother's efforts to keep her warm. Maria gave her daughter the only dry sweater left in the backpack, while Carlos explored the immediate surroundings for any familiar landmarks. João tried to remain calm, reminding himself of the difficult situations he had faced during his travels as a truck driver, always finding practical solutions to seemingly unsolvable problems. The rain persisted for another 2 hours, completely transforming the landscape around them. Small, temporary streams formed between the stones, carrying away dirt and leaves in a current that made the sound of water the only thing they could hear. Maria used the last few shots on the disposable camera to photograph her family sheltered under the rock, never imagining those would be the last images recorded on their trip. Carlos organized the stones Ana Paula had collected, creating a simple game to distract his sister from their uncomfortable situation. When the rain finally ceased, around 6 in the evening, the family found themselves in a completely different world. The landscape had been drastically altered by the water, and the landmarks they had memorized that morning seemed to have vanished under the new, wet terrain. João took the lead, proposing they systematically explore in different directions until they found a known trail or some sign of civilization. Carlos suggested they climb a higher rock formation to get a general view of the area. The climb was careful, with everyone helping João overcome his physical limitations. From the top, they could see some distant structures that might be man-made buildings, but the exact direction was difficult to determine in the shadows of the late afternoon. Maria pointed to what looked like a dirt road cutting across the horizon, possibly the same one they had used to reach the trailhead. The descent from the rock formation proved riskier than the ascent, especially with the surfaces still slippery from the recent rain. João had to carry Ana Paula through some of the steeper sections while Carlos assisted Maria with the more complex moves. During one particularly difficult maneuver, the girl's cloth doll fell, tumbling between the rocks until it came to rest in a deep crevice, from where it would be impossible to retrieve. The loss of the doll was the first moment of real despair for Ana Paula. She began to cry, insisting they try to get her most cherished toy back. Maria tried to console her, explaining that it would be too dangerous to go down into the crevice, but the child couldn't accept leaving behind the gift from her grandmother. João promised they would buy her an identical doll as soon as they returned home. But Ana Paula knew every detail of the handmade fabric and knew that something made by hand with so much love could never be replaced. With darkness falling fast, the family had to make practical decisions about how to spend the night. João determined it would be safer to remain in a sheltered spot until dawn than to try navigating the forest in the dark, especially since they didn't know the specific dangers of the region. They found a natural cavity between the rocks, large enough to shelter all four of them and protected from the wind that was beginning to pick up with the arrival of night. Maria distributed the last of the cookies and fruit from the backpack, rationing the remaining water to last until the next day. Carlos gathered dry leaves and small twigs, creating an insulating layer on the rocky floor of the cavity. Ana Paula, still heartbroken over the loss of her doll, accepted sharing her father's jacket to stay warm during the colder hours. João organized a watch schedule, taking turns with Carlos to ensure everyone could rest safely. The night in the mountains was long and uncomfortable. The sounds of the forest, amplified by the post-rain humidity, created an unsettling soundtrack of crickets, owls, and other nocturnal animals. Maria tried to keep the family's spirits up by telling stories from her childhood in the countryside, while Carlos invented optimistic plans for the following day. Ana Paula fell asleep leaning against her mother, but she woke up frequently, startled by strange noises coming from the darkness outside. João spent most of the night awake, his mind racing with the implications of their situation. He figured they should have been back at the inn by now, and surely the owner would be wondering where his guests had gone. Their white Uno was still parked in the original clearing, but finding their way back had become a far greater challenge than they had ever imagined. A constant throbbing pain radiated from his back, and he feared the condition would worsen if they had to walk long distances the next day. The dawn of March 18th brought a dense fog that drastically limited their visibility. The family awoke cold and hungry but clung to the hope that daylight would make it easier to find their bearings. Maria took stock of their remaining resources: half a liter of water, 2 apples, and a few saltine crackers. Carlos studied the surrounding terrain, searching for signs of trails or human footprints that might point them in a promising direction. They adopted a simple strategy: always head downhill, on the theory that they would eventually reach a stream or a road. João led the group, leaning on a makeshift staff to relieve the pressure on his spine. Maria walked beside Ana Paula, who still asked constantly about the doll she had lost in the rock crevice. Carlos brought up the rear, marking their path with small stacks of stones in case they needed to turn back. The morning of their second day lost was spent in a systematic search for any sign of civilization. The fog made navigation difficult, but as it gradually dissipated, it revealed an increasingly wild and untouched landscape. João began to suspect they had strayed far from the tourist trails, venturing into a completely unexplored region of the national park. Maria rationed the remaining water even more strictly, giving priority to the children who were showing growing signs of dehydration. Around 10 in the morning, Carlos spotted what looked like a man-made structure in the valley below. Approaching with caution, they discovered an old wooden cabin apparently abandoned for years, but still structurally sound. The site showed signs of sporadic use: the cold ashes of a campfire, empty cans stacked in a corner, and a few rusted tools hanging on an interior wall. João speculated it might be a shelter used by hunters or researchers working in the area. The discovery of the cabin brought a wave of temporary relief. Maria found a small crystal-clear stream running about 50 meters from the structure, securing a source of fresh water for the family. Carlos explored the surroundings and located native fruit trees, including piquis and cagaitas, that could supplement their diet. Ana Paula's spirits lifted slightly at the prospect of a more comfortable shelter, though she remained melancholic over the loss of her doll. João decided they would stay at the cabin until they could devise a safer plan for their return. He spent the afternoon organizing the interior, improvising beds from dry leaves and soft branches. Maria washed their clothes in the nearby stream, taking the opportunity for her first proper bath in 2 days. Carlos fashioned simple traps for small animals, applying techniques he'd learned at school camps, though he held little hope of success. In the afternoon, they heard the distant thrum of a helicopter overhead. The family scrambled into a nearby clearing, waving their arms desperately in an attempt to catch its attention. The helicopter passed over the area twice, but apparently did not spot them through the dense vegetation. João interpreted the flyover as a sign that someone had noticed their disappearance and that a search was underway, bringing a renewed sense of hope to them all. Their second night in the mountains was more orderly than the first. The cabin offered adequate protection from the cold and damp, allowing everyone to rest more soundly. Maria told stories to Ana Paula until the girl fell asleep, while Carlos and João planned their strategy for the next day. They decided they would try to follow the stream downhill, as watercourses often lead to inhabited areas, or at least to larger rivers that appear on maps. The third day began with a disturbing discovery. During the night, João had heard sounds he couldn't identify: distant human voices, heavy footsteps, and what seemed to be the movement of vehicles. He quietly woke Carlos, and they both listened intently, but the noises ceased before dawn. In the morning, they found fresh boot prints near the stream, clearly human and recent, but with no sign of who had made them. Maria suggested they follow the tracks. After all, any human presence represented a chance for help and guidance. The tracks led in a different direction from the stream, climbing back up toward the higher rock formations. Carlos noted there were prints from at least 2 different people, both wearing heavy-soled boots typical of farm workers or military personnel. João hesitated. His old trucker's intuition was screaming that something was wrong with the situation. Despite his reservations, the decision to follow the tracks was made collectively. Ana Paula now carried a smooth stone she had found in the stream, a symbolic replacement for her lost doll. Maria maintained a forced optimism, talking constantly to keep the family's morale high. Carlos took on the role of scout, staying a few meters ahead to check the safety of the path and the continuity of the mysterious tracks. The tracks led the family on a winding path through increasingly imposing and isolated rock formations. João noticed they were moving progressively farther from any area that could be considered a tourist route or easily accessible. The marks on the ground were sharp and fresh, clearly made by people who knew the terrain well and moved with a definite purpose. Maria began to question the wisdom of following the trail of strangers, especially since no one had responded to the occasional calls for help they shouted out. Around midday, the tracks brought them to a peculiar rock formation with several natural openings that seemed to connect into a cave system. Carlos cautiously explored the main entrance, a fissure wide enough for an adult to pass through. The interior showed unmistakable signs of recent use. The remains of a fire, food wrappers, and even some personal items left behind, as if someone had departed in a hurry. A shiver of unease ran down Joao's spine as he examined the objects inside. There were clothes that didn't look like they belonged to tourists or researchers, but rather to people living a rustic, permanent existence in the region. A hammock was still strung up in a more sheltered corner, and blackened pots indicated regular meal preparation. Maria discovered a handmade calendar scratched up to March 1995, suggesting the occupants had been there very recently. Ana Paula found a few items that sparked her childish curiosity. Polished stones arranged in neat rows, small animal bones set in a decorative pattern, and primitive drawings made with charcoal on the rock walls. Carlos mentally photographed the details to report later, should they ever make it back to civilization. Maria felt increasingly uncomfortable, suggesting they shouldn't stay in a place that clearly belonged to someone else. Their discussion about whether to stay or leave was cut short by noises from outside that made the entire family fall asleep instantly. Human voices were approaching the cave, speaking in low tones in a language they couldn't quite identify. João signaled for everyone to hide deep inside in a side passage that offered better visual cover. Carlos helped Ana Paula control her breathing to avoid making any sound that might betray their presence. The voices grew closer, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps and objects being dragged. From the fragments of conversation they could catch, they realized it was adult men discussing something about cargo and deadlines. Maria clutched Ana Paula to her chest, while João and Carlos exchanged worried glances. The situation had taken a completely unexpected turn, transforming their search for help into a potentially dangerous predicament. The men remained at the cave entrance for nearly an hour, organizing items and carrying on conversations the family couldn't fully comprehend. Occasionally, they would mention words in broken Portuguese with a heavy accent that suggested they were from other regions of the country, or perhaps even foreign. João recognized a few terms related to transport and schedules, vaguely reminding him of suspicious situations he had witnessed during his years as a trucker. When the men finally left, the family remained hidden for another 2 hours before daring to venture back to the entrance. Carlos was the first to check if the area was clear, confirming that the visitors had departed, taking several of the objects with them. Maria noticed they had left a few things behind: ropes, flashlights, and plastic containers that could be useful for their survival. But the most disturbing discovery was made by Ana Paula, who found, tucked into a side crevice of the cave, some personal items that clearly did not belong to the men. A woman's wallet with identification, a wedding ring, and family photographs suggested that other people had also been in this place, possibly under involuntary circumstances. The discovery of these personal effects completely changed the family's perception of their situation. João carefully examined the documents in the wallet, identifying them as belonging to a woman from Belo Horizonte who, according to an old newspaper also found nearby, had been reported missing. Maria vaguely recognized the family in the photographs from news reports about disappearances in the Serra da Canastra region. The terrifying reality of their situation began to dawn on them. Carlos urged that they abandon the cave immediately and try to find an escape route. It was clear they had stumbled into something far more serious than just being lost on a tourist trail. João agreed, but his physical condition, deteriorated by days of hiking and stress, made it difficult to maintain the pace needed for a swift retreat. Ana Paula, still not fully grasping the gravity of the situation, questioned why they had to run from the place that had offered them shelter. Maria quickly gathered their few belongings, including the flashlights left by the mysterious men. The family left the cave, heading in the opposite direction from which the strangers had come, hoping to find a route that would lead them back to the known areas of the national park. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, demanding climbs and descents that tested the physical limits of everyone, especially João. During the afternoon, they spotted the search helicopter again, but this time they managed to position themselves in a wide clearing where the aircraft could clearly see them. The helicopter circled the area several times before one of the crew members waved, confirming they had been located. Maria wept with relief while Carlos jumped for joy, certain they would finally be rescued and could return to safety. The rescue, however, did not happen as they expected. The helicopter moved away without attempting to land, apparently searching for a suitable spot for the operation. The family waited anxiously for hours, but the aircraft did not return before nightfall. João began to suspect that the terrain conditions might be preventing a direct rescue and that they would need to walk to a pre-established meeting point. During their fifth night lost in the mountains, the family camped in a natural depression sheltered from the wind. Maria distributed the last of the food they had managed to collect, mostly wild fruits that Carlos had identified as edible. Ana Paula showed signs of weakness and despair, constantly asking when they would go home and if they could visit the grave of the grandmother who had made her lost doll. João spent much of the night mentally planning their actions for the next day. He believed the helicopter would return at dawn and they needed to be ready to signal their location again. Carlos proposed they build a large, smoky fire using techniques he'd learned from survival manuals. Maria held on to the hope that they would soon be back at the inn, taking a hot shower and calling their grandparents in Alegrete. The morning of the sixth day brought low clouds that would hinder any aerial rescue operation. The family decided to walk toward what they believed was the area where the helicopter could land safely. João led the group, leaning on his makeshift staff, followed by Maria, who helped Ana Paula over the most difficult stretches. Carlos scouted ahead, ever watchful for signs of danger or the presence of the mysterious men from the cave. Around midday, they reached an area of lower vegetation where they could see distant structures that looked like farms or rural workstations. Hope was immediately renewed as any legitimate human presence meant salvation and a return to the civilized world. Maria used her last reserves of strength to quicken her pace, anxious to reach what seemed to be the end of their ordeal. But as they drew closer, the buildings revealed a reality far different from what they had hoped. The structures that had looked like farms from a distance were actually crude, temporary installations clearly not intended for legitimate agriculture or ranching. João immediately recognized the signs of illegal activity he had learned to spot during his years on the road. Vehicles without license plates, camouflage structures, and the furtive movements of people who avoided being seen. Maria realized they had walked directly into a situation of extreme danger. The men they saw moving among the buildings were the same ones they had heard at the cave days before. Carlos tried to guide the family into a silent retreat, but Ana Paula, weakened by days of deprivation, stumbled on a loose rock, making just enough noise to alert the camp's occupants. Their discovery was inevitable. João tried to explain that they were merely lost tourists, seeking directions back to the park's official trails. But it was painfully obvious they had seen far too much. Too many details of the illegal operation unfolding before them. Maria pulled Ana Paula into a protective embrace while Carlos remained vigilant, his eyes scanning for any chance of escape, however slim. The men, about 5 of them with rugged features and a clearly hostile demeanor, conferred in low, urgent whispers about what to do with the unexpected witnesses. João caught fragments of their conversation, enough to understand the horrifying truth. His family had become a logistical problem for men engaged in activities that could never see the light of day. Their predicament had shifted from a simple matter of being lost to a desperate struggle for survival. Maria tried to appeal to their humanity, explaining they had young children and only wanted to return home to Alegrete. Beside her, Ana Paula wept silently, instinctively grasping the gravity of their situation. Carlos positioned himself between the strangers and his family, a shield of unexpected courage that surprised even his own father. The men's decision was swift. The family would be held there until their captors decided their fate. It was a verdict João immediately recognized as a potential death sentence. Maria whispered prayers as she held Ana Paula, trying to project a calm she did not feel. Meanwhile, Carlos mentally mapped out escape routes, calculating distances and obstacles, waiting for a single fleeting opportunity. For the next several hours, the family was confined to a crude shack as the men went about their business. João watched, piecing together enough details to understand he was witnessing a smuggling operation, the transport of illegal materials through the isolated mountain range. Maria kept Ana Paula distracted, whispering stories in her ear. Carlos feigned sleep, but behind closed eyelids he remained acutely aware of their captors' every move. Night fell over the Serra da Canastra, and with the darkness came the chilling certainty that the Ribeiro family's fate was sealed. The men now spoke openly of schedules and the need to eliminate any evidence that could compromise their future operations. João gathered Maria and his children into his arms, whispering words of love, his voice breaking as he apologized for leading them into this unthinkable nightmare. Their last conversation took place in the dead of night. Ana Paula asked if they would ever see their grandparents in Alegrete again. Maria replied that they would always be together, no matter what, and that their family's love was eternal, even if they could no longer hold their loved ones. Carlos promised to look after his sister until the very end, and João spoke of their happiest moments, of the 17 years of love they had shared. 4 years later, in August of 1999, a group of speleologists exploring a remote cave in the Serra da Canastra made a discovery that would shock the entire nation. 4 black plastic bags, carefully sealed and partially hidden by a pile of rocks, contained the mortal remains of the Ribeiro family. The scene pointed to a hasty attempt at concealment, carried out by individuals who knew the area but lacked the time or proper equipment for a more thorough burial. The case became a landmark in Brazil's criminal history, a tragic testament to how illegal activities in remote areas can shatter the lives of innocent people who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. If this true story has affected you, please subscribe to our channel to follow other cases that have left their mark on the country. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode, and share this with friends who are also interested in true investigative stories. Let us know in the comments what case you would like us to cover next.